intelligent people are trying to put forward a worldview. And I don't understand why that would be if we're just all trying to find the truth.
Greetings and welcome to the Unrefined Podcast. I am Brandon Spain, your host on this journey through the mysterious, the unexplained, and the supernatural, all viewed through the lens of biblical truth. Connect with us and gain access to exclusive content at unrefinedpodcast.com. Now, for this week's episode. All right, y'all. What happens when a hard-nosed neuroscience researcher goes chasing the edges of consciousness and stumbles into the supernatural? Well, today's guest didn't sit out looking for God. In fact, he spent most of his life convinced that he didn't exist. In his book, God's Eye View, he walks us through the most beautiful experiment ever designed, questioning whether matter even exists without an observer. He weaves neuroscience, quantum mechanics, history, philosophy, and theology into a tapestry that doesn't just poke holes in atheism. It suggests that science itself might be calling us to the supernatural. And by following the data to its edge, he discovered God. Welcome to our show, Dr. Trevor Lohman.
Oh man, thanks for having me. What an intro. I would have recruited you to write the back of my book cover. That was fantastic. Thank you. People have described my book differently. That's my intended description right there that you laid out. So thank you.
Oh wow, that's good to know.
Because it's not an attack on science. It's not. I'm not necessarily trying to convert people, although partly I might be, but what you just said is exactly it. I want to unite these two sort of things we've been told are opposed to one another.
Yeah, I first don't know if you know this guy. He's an Anglican theologian, John Polkinghorne. Years ago, I read a book by him of trying to basically say there needs to be ecumenicalism in the church, but there also needs to be ecumenical in the academia with science and stuff. Theology, Trevor, for years was called the queen of sciences. And so, boom, and now, and we can get into the scientism, which I think is a religion on its own, has
Definitely.
come in and have you ever heard of a guy named Matt Ehret? And he talks about two streams of sciences that come down. There's one version that's more of an alchemic version of science, and one is more pure science. Have you ever heard of those two streams?
No, it sounds fascinating though.
It's got a lot of conspiracy stuff in it too, but
yeah, I love it.
Yeah, but it's really fascinating talking about just the intentions of the different scientists, and he didn't paint Tesla in a very good light. I've always respected Tesla and thought he got a raw deal a lot of things, but I think like you said in your book, he's got a little of a shady side to him too.
He's an enigma, man. I mean, definitely I assumed, when I started digging into him that I would just love him because I grew up on, all these things like History Channel documentaries about the secret technologies of Tesla and stuff. But he was a complicated guy. And, maybe he's been sort of like his history has been, if you want to get real conspiratorial, like manipulated or changed. But I don't know. I mean, he was not the like mystical guy that I thought he would be. He was very much a realist, a materialist.
That's fascinating. That really surprised me when you put that in your book. Yeah.
He was offended by the people we think today as being hyper realist, like Einstein.
He's
like Einstein's a metaphysicist, spiritual woo-woo guy. Like
that's crazy. But then when you explained it in your book, it made a lot of sense. It really did. So, well, let's not jump ahead of ourselves. Well, I just want to start off first, just a little bit about you, talking about you. And so what inspired you as a former atheist? And I know you were into neuroscience before you were, which is, I don't see how neuroscientists can stay atheist. It's so fascinating. Anyway,
I don't either, but they do.
Yeah, no, to write God's Eye View. So what inspired you to write this book?
Well, I mean, part of it was just my own kind of internal things going on in my life. Like you said, I was an atheist my whole life. I grew up, I was a kid of the 90s. And the 90s were like peak scientism.
Mm-hmm.
We had the Human Genome Project. Disease was going to be ended. We're going to Mars. Silicon Valley's programming stuff with code. And then also your cells are made of code. So you're a computer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And being 8, 9, 10, 11 in that decade, like going to church maybe occasionally. My parents weren't very, they believe in God, but it wasn't a big part of our lives at all.
Right.
And church seemed kind of boring, and we weren't really
It
talking about
was.
the
Yeah,
interesting stuff that I now know we could have been talking about.
absolutely.
And I was like, man, I'm if you're a curious person who like has this like idealistic view and you want to make the world a better place, it sure seemed like science was the way to go, because science was like hopeful, it was optimistic, it was going to give you an opportunity to help people, and
Produces
you're
results.
tangible, measurable
Yeah,
results. and
yeah,
and then meanwhile we're looking at this like Star Trek future in television, because we
yeah.
had all these science fiction things coming out, and it was like obvious, like, of course, if you're a curious person. I was one of those kids who's always told he was smart. I wasn't very good at sports, right? But I was always told I was smart. And so you lean into the things you're good at. And I was good at science. And, you know, 15 years go by of that. And pretty soon you're arguing with college roommates that God doesn't exist in your dormitory. And then so 10 years of that, you realize, looking back now, when I got into grad school, even kind of the tail end of undergrad, and you realize it's just completely empty. And all these ideas that were in the culture in the 90s are now kind of gone in like the 2010s. The Human Genome Project didn't help anybody, basically. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a few random things, and I don't want to diminish like some of the advances with CRISPR and sickle
CRISPR. Yeah.
cell, but other than a handful of really specific genetic mutations, we've done nothing after 30 years, billions of dollars. And we're still trying to figure out how to do some of these adventurous things in space I thought we were going to do in the 90s. And you realize, like, okay, clearly I was wrong. But I still had kind of that like kind of antagonistic, condescending view of believers, because I felt like they were all in without evidence. It was like a blind faith. And I was like, well, I'm being pretty arrogant about my beliefs right now, because my entire worldview, which was science is this force for good, and it is a worldview, and everything's random and all these atheistic things. I feel like I was wrong about a lot of that. Maybe I shouldn't assume I know everything about belief and religion either. So I thought, well, let's kind of do a middle ground here. Let's see what these fathers of science thought about religion, because my assumption was that, because this is what we were told, that all these scientists were like fighting against this oppressive church, the
Yeah.
Enlightenment
Yep.
and all that stuff.
Yep.
And aspects of that are true for sure, but
Galileo, stuff like that. Yeah.
yeah, but even the Galileo story is not nearly as
Is it? Yeah.
like horrific as we've
We
been
were
led to
taught.
believe.
Yeah.
He basically was an old man and was confined to his house, which was beautiful and palatial for the rest of his life. But anyway, so what do these guys think? Were these like these renegade, like atheists who just were truth seekers of the biggest kind? And like that was kind of the story we'd been fed. Completely wrong. And it took almost no digging to realize it was completely wrong. I mean, you can read the writing from these guys, definitely the Enlightenment thinkers, but even like the 20th century physicists and stuff. These guys were all looking for God, all of them. I mean, there's
Yeah.
exceptions, but
Yeah.
most of them.
Yeah.
And they were trying to figure out the way matter works, because they were trying to figure out the way creation works, because they wanted to know more about the creator. And then so once you realize that, you're like, man, I really gotta examine how I've come to believe all the things I believe about science and religion. And it's very clearly like a cultural phenomenon. It's not rooted in any real evidence. So once I figured that out, I'm like, okay, I want to know more about this, but I can't spend 4 hours a day reading stuff if it's not going to turn into anything. So I'm going to write a book. And so I sat down and wrote the book.
You just said something that I think is very significant, and I wanted to ask you this. I suppose as you went along with the book, and even perhaps before, you started to realize, like I did, that all things are hooked up politically.
Mhm.
And people think science is pure science, and money and politics and all this doesn't come into it. Was there an event when you were writing or before that made you realize maybe this worldview that I've constructed, this Helm's Deep that I've constructed here, use a Lord of the Rings metaphor, is maybe it's a little hole where the bomb can come through, has something to do with
Yeah.
politics or money. Was there an event or any kind of political type thing that made you register that? Or
Yeah, so I have like a very, I guess, I mean, it feels unique to me. Maybe it's not, but I feel like I have a very sort of unique story because my if you don't mind, just a little tangent here. So
yeah,
I originally I did my undergrad in molecular biology. I thought I was going to be a doctor, a physician,
yeah,
and the financial collapse had just happened a few years ago. I was pretty unserious as a 18-year-old. I didn't see myself becoming a physician. So I'm like, what can I do? And at the time, the way the economy was, if you could get like a quick healthcare job, not a physician job, but like be an RN or a PA or a PT,
yeah,
that was
yeah.
like six figures with a few years of work. And at the time, that's all I cared about because I was on my own I went to college on my own, but now I was really on my own because I was graduating and I needed money. And it was 2011. So money was like, we were all worried about money still, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So I did a 3 year clinical doctorate in physical therapy. And I didn't like it at all. I mean, I just did not like healthcare. I don't know if it was specifically PT. I didn't like the practice of waking up, going and being 100% focused on these ailments that people had and then documenting them and dealing with insurance. And maybe I'm just selfish, but my personality is like I want to like think about the big questions, like most people, but I have
Research.
it
Yeah.
I have it to like an almost like pathological degree. So I was like I can't do this. So thought maybe I'll get into healthcare administration because it's a little bit more like strategic and oh my gosh, that was even worse.
Mm, mm.
Very quickly realized the business of healthcare is just it's anyway, that's a
Yeah,
story for another time.
yeah.
But
We all know what you're talking about. Yeah,
so then I'm like, well, I did some research in undergrad. Let me go back to that. I got my PhD, did focused on gene expression and mRNA. And so by the time I got that degree, I was already really suspicious of institutions. Having come out of that healthcare administration role and just seeing how corrupt it was. And keep in mind, healthcare is supposed to be like where you go if you're caring
yeah.
and I think that's mostly true at the practitioner level, but at the administration level, it's just horrible. And so I already had a pretty healthy dose of skepticism. So that really guided me in my PhD and my postdoc in neuroscience. And I started seeing these theories that neuroscientists had developed, which explain human experience. And I'm like, oh, this is clearly BS. Like they're not even practicing what they preach in terms of scientific rigor. Like this is pseudoscience, obviously. So that really got my curiosity wheel spinning. Like I still work in a mainstream lab, and so I still try not to, you know, o- offend my colleagues with my
Rock the boat.
ideas.
Yeah,
But it's not it feels philosophical. It feels like this group of really intelligent people are trying to put forward a worldview. And I don't understand why that would be if we're just all trying to find the truth, right? Which I think is what attracted me to science in the first place.
right.
There's like an intention, maybe it's unspoken, maybe they're not even aware of it, but there is this intention to put forward a worldview that explains human experience without using any words that they don't like. Creator, God, spirit, soul, anything that just puts folks on edge. That obviously triggered my spider sense there. Like, well, there's something wrong here in science. What's going on?
Yeah, that's interesting because I come from a philosophical. Like I said, I had minored in English, but I went into philosophy at first, and that's what I loved in high school. I was reading Ayn Rand and Sartre and and all that stuff in high school before I was converted. It gave me a basis to think. It gave me a framework to think, and so I'm appreciative of it, even though I don't agree with over half of it. But and it's interesting that you said that they were constructing a philosophical thing, and it strikes me as crazy because it's almost like we all think we don't have our own worldview, our own rose colored
Right.
glasses, our own,
Yeah.
and then you really see that in scientism that we can objectively look at the world, and then what happens? Quantum physics happens, So let's go into the thing that fascinated me the most about your book was the whole dealing with the whole consciousness aspect of it.
Yeah.
And so if you can, in 10th grader, 12th grader
Yeah.
terms,
Yeah.
just talk to us about consciousness, how it's been defined, and how with you it's changed, and how you have begun to see it. I don't want you to reveal your whole book because I want people to read it, because it's great, y'all. I mean, it's hard, but it's worth it. But just kind of give us a snapshot of that consciousness.
Yeah. I guess like most scientific people, I didn't really think consciousness was that interesting or important for some reason, which in hindsight is like an insane thing to say, right?
Well, let me stop you. Let me stop
Yeah.
you, because I was gonna ask you this at the end, but I just got to throw it in now. The big question that I've been pondering for probably about, and my wife just laughs at me. She jokes, for about the past 2 months, is how does a baby think? See? And she's like, I don't know. I've never thought about that. I said, no, nobody thinks about that. It has no language. So how does a baby think? Anyway, so I
Well,
didn't
no,
mean her.
that's like a critical distinction because okay, I
Yeah.
gotta really struggle to lay this out correctly because I think this is like the most important part in neuroscience and even in like popular culture. You just think of what does it mean to be a human? Well, I think. I rationalize, I think, therefore I am, right? That I don't think could be more incorrect. I think we need to use more words to describe the human experience than think or rationalize. I think there's different things that go on in your head. And I think some of those things can be explained with very like mundane computer analogies and
Yeah.
circuitry and networks and wiring, and other things can't. And so neuroscience and people in general, atheists in general for sure, have been really reluctant to acknowledge that to the point where they really even just deny that consciousness exists. So I want to try to explain what I think consciousness is so folks can try to decide if they agree that it's ridiculous to dismiss this as being an illusion, which is what most neuroscientists do. Okay, so I think of a word that I'm going to say to you next, right? I see that word, not visually, but I'm aware of the word I'm going to say to you, like just like a fraction of a second before I say it. Let's say I'm sad. Okay, well, who's sad? Who's experiencing being sad? Or I'm hungry. Who's experiencing being hungry? These are things that are happening to someone, to some agent. There's this guy, Robert Sapolsky, and he argues really aggressively, and he's a genius. I hate to admit it. He argues really aggressively against free will and
Oh, yeah.
consciousness.
I am very anti-deterministic. That's why I loved your book. So anyway, keep going.
Thank you. Thank you. But he kind of like he'll show a mechanism in the brain that explains like how you talk and say, "Look, see, it's not that you are this divine conscious being coming up with words to say. There's this little part of your brain that's like a computer that comes up with the words and okay, fine. The analogy I like to use is this applies to people will use like schizophrenia or addiction as examples that we don't have free will or that we're not conscious, that we are just like consequences of the structure of our brain, from our personality to our emotion to the choices we make. It's just a consequence of the shape and connections inside of our mind. And there's probably some truth to that. Like, listen, I'm a neuroscientist. I'm not going to argue that the brain isn't related to behavior or, you know, urges or sensations. Of course it is.
Interesting. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
No, no.
interestingly enough, in science, I follow a lot of neuroscience. It hadn't been until the last 10, 15, 20 years that they've actually started treating the brain for these problems.
Right.
The mind was here and the brain was here, and we didn't have brain health and supplements for the brain, and it was like the only disease that didn't have an organ attached to it. But now it's like they've gone the other direction. It's all, it's completely the brain. And anyway, I'll let you keep talking.
Whether it's a good point because whether it's intentional or not, there is an effort. The direction things are moving is to make the mind and the brain indistinguishable from one another. There's no distinction between those two words.
Yeah.
The brain is the mind is the brain. And any extrapolation we make that the mind is this amazing, powerful thing is just because we have anxiety about death and we can't, it's hard for us to imagine that we really are just chemicals. Like, okay, it's an insulting viewpoint, but I get it. I get the
Yeah.
point they're trying to make. So back to addiction, back to schizophrenia, like okay, something in someone's mind can change, and now they display schizophrenic symptoms, right? They're seeing visual hallucinations that are real to them. So clearly, your experience of reality is determined by the structure of your brain. And to that, I say, okay, but who is experiencing the visual hallucinations? Even in your description of schizophrenia, you're acknowledging the presence of an observer in that person's mind. And to me, that's what consciousness is. Who's addicted to the drug? Who is feeling this craving for the drug and fighting against it? To me, that's more of an argument for free will than against addiction. But there is a passenger behind your eyes, between your ears, experiencing the outside world and your own inner world. And we can't pretend like that doesn't exist, which is what neuroscience does right now. It pretends like that experience, it is an experience. It's difficult to study because it's subjective.
Mm-hmm.
But to just all like wink, wink, it's not real is very strange to me. I don't get why that's the case. And so I use the analogy of a car. It's my favorite analogy. A person driving a car. The hardcore neuroscientists, biologists, they want to their analogies that they use, their arguments that they use are the equivalent of saying something like, "Hey, look, I cut the brake lines of the car. Now the car won't stop." Clearly structure determines function. And to that I would say, yes, you're correct. The structure of your brain determines certain things. If you have a stroke in this area, you can't move your right arm. Right? I get it. There's a obvious, biomedicine is basically this based on this idea of structure equals function. Yes, but it doesn't disprove the presence of a driver in the car. There's still someone in the car trying to hit the brakes and it's not working, or turning the wheel, or just watching the situation unfold. There's an observer in our mind. And so to me, that's what consciousness is, the experience of being in your body, viewing the world, and viewing your own inner world.
Yeah, we had interestingly enough, you talking about consciousness. We had a guy on here that does a lot of work with schizophrenics, and he is on the fringe of it, obviously. And he brought an interesting point out because he believed that they are consciousnesses too. He doesn't go what I call the demon in the gaps. Oh, it's the devil, it's a demon, but they're energy type creatures. But what blew me away when I was interviewing him was this. He said, they never give you positive things to think about. Schizophrenic voices never say, "You're having a good day. Let's have a good day together," you know?
Yeah,
And
you're actually much better than you think you are.
they're always negative. And I'm like, that right there ought to be, I mean, but neuroscientists completely gloss over that. They gloss over that propensity for just solid negativity and no positivity there.
Yeah, that's
And
pretty interesting.
yeah,
I am I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle of all these ideas. I don't know.
yeah.
I hear that, that doesn't offend me. At this
Mhm.
point, I don't know
Mhm.
what's real. I don't you know
Mhm.
what I mean? But
Mhm.
But then part of me, after all these years of education and stuff says, well, no, there probably is like a mechanistic explanation of why certain things happen to someone and
Right.
all these brain disorders, right?
Yeah.
I just push back that there's a mechanistic physical explanation of your experience of those things. I think there's two layers.
Yeah.
I mean, man, the Bible told us this a long time ago.
A long time ago.
I think there's
Yeah.
a physical body, and then I think there's something that sits on top of that and within it, maybe like a spirit or a
Yeah.
soul.
Yeah.
And I personally think that's sort of where the science is going. Although the people in this field are completely resistant to using that type of vocabulary.
Yeah, I
They'll
imagine.
say they'll say the quantum field. They'll say the quantum vibration. I mean, they'll use every word they can other than, simulation hypothesis. They'll come up with any scientific version of the word God and spirit they can. But I still think it's interesting. I'm glad people are doing that work.
Yeah, and I delve a little bit into the paranormal. I'm not a ghost hunter or any of that kind of stuff, but even then, there's still a scientific when they encounter these phenomena of electromagnetic energy, and so there's even still a scientific possible background dealing with that kind of stuff that we can, somehow still sense that ghost in the machine, so to speak. And
But yeah, I agree.
but
If I could just
yeah,
comment on that last point. So I think there is like this. I'm critical of the same thing on my side of the fence, like more of the scientific side of the fence, but also on more of the folks who believe in the supernatural. I think there is like this instinct to be distrustful of anyone trying to explain supernatural phenomena with
Yes.
science.
Yes.
And I get that because people are probably used to scientific arguments being used to tell you you're wrong or
Yeah.
you're crazy. But you know, if we are really just sort of detached emotionally from the long history of conflict between belief and science and blah blah blah, if we just look at science as what it was intended to be, a tool for understanding, why what that shouldn't offend you. If anything, if you can show a mechanism behind this thing you believe in, like that's evidence in support of that phenomenon existing, you know?
Yeah.
And that was sort of my take on consciousness and the soul. Like, hey, if we can show this these amazing scientific phenomena that we don't understand actually support the existence of a soul, like, isn't like I don't know. I think there's part of me that still is just trying to like throw a life preserver back to all of these atheists in the academy. Like, come on, guys, you know. And so I'm kind of hung up on that for some reason. But I think you can use logic to end up at these kind of fringe ideas.
Well, and two, and I've come to believe that I draw deeply from Aquinas when it comes to this in secondary causes, and just because something looks natural doesn't mean God's not involved in it.
Right. Right.
And see that comes from my distaste for hard determinism and all that kind of stuff. And and I do believe in my theology that God can be involved, and that's where we get miracles from. But even then, I believe that some miracles are actually. I mean, I give you an example. We have a friend who she broke her ankle, and several places she was hiking, and in the whole process of it, it didn't just like instantly get healed and come together, but through prayer, it actually healed faster. And even the doctor remarked how much faster that it healed. And it was kind of like, this is weird. And and so there you go. There's an example of God. And and they've done all these studies with prayer, and one of the coolest ones I think is when they prayed for people like so many years ago, which that really gets quantum. And they prayed for I can't remember what doctor it was, but he prayed for somebody from 5, 10 years ago, and then they blind study anyway. And all that fascinates me because that shows and it's interesting because that's also in the Bible. In Eden, you have a place of liminality of where the supernatural, the outside the machine, exists with the machine. And the Garden of Eden, most of the people that I run with believe it was on a mountain, and it was the mountain of God, and that's why the Tower of Babel, and you have all this propensity in the Bible towards mountains. And so the original Eve Garden of Eden was on a mountain, and it was a place where both the supernatural elements of a God fellowshipped with the humanity part of it. And I think using that as an analogy of science, I think that's how it should be. It's not an either or. And I know that's so trite.
I
It's a
know
both.
people want you to pick a side. I know.
Yeah, it's a both and blah blah blah. But sometimes it is a both and. Sometimes and when you dive into this quantum stuff we're about to talk about, I mean, it has to be a both and.
Yeah, I mean, people are right. People are right to tell you you need to pick a side if you're treating science like a worldview. If you're treating science like a method,
Ooh,
you
that's good.
can you don't need to pick a side. It's like saying you can either be a believer or skateboard a certain way. And it's like, whoa, these are two like completely these
Hmm.
are different categories of things. Like
Hmm.
my worldview comes from my faith, from my belief. And this science is it's just a way to figure stuff out. It's not it has been turned into a worldview, a philosophy,
Yes. Yeah.
and I think I encourage believers to like just fight against that urge to like completely distrust anything scientific. Now I get it, trust me, I get it. I really
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
um Especially after the pandemic stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
I get why you would just say, okay, if a scientist is telling me something, I know he's full of it. But forget
No.
these
Yeah.
are practitioners of a method, and people come in all different varieties and flavors, just like religious folks. And
Exactly.
so,
Yeah.
like,
That's what I was about to say. Yep.
don't give up this powerful tool that we were endowed with.
Exactly.
I wish I could remember the quote, but something along the lines like, I refuse to believe that the God that gave me this ability to deduce and use logic wouldn't want me to use it.
Yes.
And so now obviously it's a spectrum. Like you can be more on the like prideful side of things with your intellect, right? And trying to this is what the institution of science does, trying to explain where we come from and all the stuff in a way that doesn't include God. Like I agree that's wrong. But somewhere in the middle there's a use for this stuff. But
Yeah.
you mentioned something about prayer. That was one of the things that struck me writing this book was because I was reading the gospel for the first time about 6 months before writing this book, so it was obviously, like, fresh in my mind, and so I'm very, like, honest with the fact that I'm new to this stuff, so if I'm wrong about something, people feel free to correct me, but I was really struck because I was reading the quantum mechanics stuff at the same time I was reading the New Testament, and, I couldn't believe the insistence in both bodies of text that belief is central to your reality. And some of the quotes from Jesus are like unbelievable. Like the you can say to the mountain, "Move from here to there." When Peter's walking on the water and he starts to doubt and he sinks into the water. I mean, I know people interpret that sometimes as like a metaphor, but maybe not.
Well, I was about to say we have our scientists too that explain away anything supernatural from the Bible, and that's one of my missions is to bring the supernatural back to the Bible. Anyway, so
Yeah, that's funny. That's interesting why that would be the case. But it sounds like you just like the institution of science, the institution of religion has its weird little cultural battles and stuff that they're dealing with. But as like an outsider looking in, when I read that stuff, I'm like, and this is exactly what these fathers of quantum mechanics were saying. That your belief in the state of a system affects the system. So that just struck me. That's why I kind of made a couple chapters about that because it is over and over again that Jesus makes comments like this, and I really should just have written them all out so I could quote them all. But there, it's like over and over. He's saying like, pray as if you've already received these things. There's an insistence that believing in the outcome is important.
hmm
I don't think that's an accident. Like it's repeated too many times for it to just be like a kind of trivial, metaphorical, linguistic flaw in the scriptures. It seems
yeah,
like a
yeah.
core tenet, and that's what the fathers of quantum mechanics thought about the real world, about reality. So it's
Well,
fascinating.
and see, and this is what I advocate a lot of times is I see and I guess our competition, so to speak, as a Christian, I'm a Christian, is more the New Age aspect, and they have more faith in a benevolent universe than we have in a loving Father. That it's just not right. What happened is because of Christians' kickback of science, we threw the baby out with the bathwater, and so somebody who is willing to adopt or do anything. Hey, yeah, that sounds good. Let's go for it. And they adopted it, and I just think that it explains. Look, when I started studying quantum physics and even neuroscience, and I do a lot of work with coaching and spiritual formation. Well, neuroscience is crucial. It says in Romans 12:2, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Well, what does that mean? I mean, that is neuroscience. I mean,
I love that.
does God want us just to, keep it? It's almost like you have these fundamentalists on both sides of the science and the religious thing, and they're both wrong, and they need to
Yes.
they need to realize all of the gifts that God has given us, and this is definitely one of them. Well,
I
let
mean,
me
I
go
got to
ahead.
comment on that. That was just so good. I mean, I always hesitate to talk too much about religion just because
Yeah,
it's new to me. And but reading me, I think I almost have an advantage in some sense that I wasn't raised religious because I'm not bringing any weird
bag.
baggage to it. And I see folks all the time, they'll argue with me about the things the Catholic Church did in 1350, and I'm like, what does that have to do with what we're talking about?" There's clearly, like, some, like, cultural stuff in their mind that just they can't get past, and
It's
so
the same institutional stuff that you dealt with when you were in
exactly,
the
yeah,
medical
yeah.
stuff. Yep.
And even more in the research stuff, it's just like anyway, so when I had the opportunity to read the gospel for the first time, I was like, "Man, this is not what I expected at all." The enemy, I mean, there's obviously more than one enemy, but the enemies are like the people who are just like hyper focused on the rules and the doctrine and the dogma. And Jesus is, if he's mad at anybody, it's the religious authority, which is like,
Exactly.
whoa, like that's not what I was expecting was going to be in here. And he's just so bright. I mean, you read this stuff and you're like, man, like this is just so clearly correct. And so that was just exciting for me. Oh, but when like you're saying people just are getting like hyper fixated on removing the supernatural and making this about just like I guess a moral lesson. I don't read it like that. I don't see my, and again, this is my new interpretation. I
No.
didn't see Jesus as like a moralizer walking around finger waving. He was he seemed hyper fixated on what you really felt and believed. He didn't tell people not to ask questions. In fact, the opposite. I mean, most of those 4 books are people asking him questions and him teaching. So yeah, but I just had this like I was really surprised, and I don't know if you can be surprised like that, unless you had sort of my weird experience of not finding religion until you're 35. So I don't know what you
Well, I
think.
mean, it goes back to the whole Lewis's statement. I'm sure you've heard this. Jesus was either a liar, a lunatic, or a lord. He wasn't a moralizer. And
He was
Lewis
so countercultural, so
exactly.
countercultural.
Very much so, and yeah, and you even see that even in the letters of Paul, because he'll get slighted too, but about all these different kind of things. But he was countercultural too, responding to the culture of the time, and not just the Jewish world, but in the pagan world as well. And so yeah, and, amazingly, Trevor, all this has not done anything but revive my faith.
Awesome.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, just the mechanics of it, and I don't want to say this. I'm not saying that. Oh, science backs up what I believe, so therefore, yeah, I believe it more. It's not that, but it is helpful to understand. Prayer works because there's contingencies out there, and you affect the contingencies with your thinking. From well, let's talk about that great big, beautiful experiment, huh? Use a pun for nowadays.
Yeah. Man, I've been talking too much because, yeah, now if we're just gonna start on the double slit experiment, man,
I know, we're all over the
I
place. I
I
chase rabbits, brother.
I I hope people are as intrigued by this experiment as I am. I mean, I interrupted your question, but people have strong opinion. Okay, real quick before you ask your next question. I was expecting to get in trouble from like real fundamentalist Christian folks because I am doing this like scientific exploration of biblical principles, sort of. I haven't gotten any of that. None. Zero.
Wow.
No
Really?
pushback. And part of it is probably who's picking up my book. The people who are picking up my book are probably not likely to make those kind of criticisms.
Well, I'm kind of a geek, not really a sciencey geek, but I'm a geek, and you that man, that book appealed to me when I was like, yeah, definitely. So, yeah.
And so that I was pleasantly surprised by that. I'm not sure how many like straight up atheists have read my book, but I haven't gotten any pushback from them either. All the pushback I'm getting is from like that agnostic middle ground
Hmm.
where everyone has like their own personal opinion of how the universe works. And people will get really offended when you try to use these things that they're using to craft their own understanding of how the universe works to support the existence of God. It's almost like I'm stealing their arguments from them that they've been using to sort of push against religion. I'm repurposing them in a way that I think makes more sense personally.
Mhm.
Man, people do not like it, and people will like attack. The, Listen, these are complicated experiments. There's lots of different interpretations. I try
Mhm.
to I try to address that in the book, but people who are more in that agnostic middle ground, man, they have not been favorable.
I hadn't even looked at your Amazon. I'm gonna do that after the podcast. Go look at your Amazon reviews, see what people
Reviews are
say.
good, thank goodness. So,
Really, that's good.
yeah,
That's good.
the people who are upset at me have emailed me, hallelujahs.
Good. Well, I'm going to go review it after the podcast. But yeah, anybody out there that reads this book, give them some good reviews because I think this is the future. As we see AI and neuro links and all this kind of stuff, I mean that's still playing into the old science, but it also has a dark side that I won't go into in this podcast too. I'm starting to see.
Well, I think all thing
It's neutral,
these
but
scientific principles are just principles.
yep,
People can be good and evil, you
yep,
know?
yep,
Just like money is amoral. You can
yep.
use it to feed the poor, you can use it to do something horrible, right? I think scientific principles are the exact same thing. And so,
Which shows consciousness. I mean, doesn't it?
yeah, and free will. Free
Yeah,
will.
exactly. Yeah.
And so there like I feel like science has been fighting that science is good, belief is bad. No, science is amoral. It could be good or bad. People are good and evil, and forces are good and evil. And so really I think we need to change that paradigm in our mind
Yes.
that things and principles are good or evil. No, people and spirits are good and evil.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the double split. I mean, I think that's crucial. I know I've got it backwards here, but I think it's crucial to help understand what I was talking about the whole contingency aspect, and people need to realize that. I think, Trevor, what I want people to see is that their prayers really do make a difference, and that what you say matters, but also what you think matters almost as much as what you say. And this experiment right here shows it. Can you kind of illustrate that to us, please?
Yeah, man. No pressure. Let me just start by explaining the experiment.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And so it's like beautifully simple in a sense. Just picture maybe like a 10-inch by 10-inch piece of thin, like paper, but metal, a thin sheet of metal with two eyes, the letter I, capital, but without the little
Yeah,
bars,
yeah.
horizontal bar, just two vertical slits. And so picture setting that in the middle of a room on a pedestal, and behind it is some photoreactive film, maybe like 10 feet behind it. Film that when light hits it, it reacts. And then on the other side of the room, a machine that spits out photons, little particles of light. And so this is the experiment that was used 200 years ago to determine if light was a particle or a wave. And we learned that light was actually a wave, and that was a surprise. Newton thought light was a particle. Thomas Young, with this experiment, proved it was a wave. Because what happened is when you shone a light at those two vertical bars, you have a wavefront of light, like picture ripples in a pond moving outward from where you dropped a pebble. You have a wavefront of light, it's one wave, and then it hits this metal sheet, and two new waves come out of the two holes. And so
Hmm.
what you do is you turn one wave into two, and those two new waves interact with one another such that the shadow, the image on the photoreactive film, has these little ruffles. And so if light was a particle, you'd expect to see two vertical eyes on the photoreactive film, right? Two bars. But you don't. You see this weird interference pattern. So, okay, boring. Who cares? Well, 100 years later, Max Planck, a Lutheran, all these guys were Christian. It's unbelievable.
I know it's crazy.
And I just love that. I feel like that's such a piece of scientific history that just gets completely removed from the lessons. All these guys were Christian.
Well, I think there's a reason for that in the big scheme of things, but we won't go there either.
I, I I tend to agree. And so he starts doing some experiments that shows like no, light is a particle, but for 100 years we've known it's a wave. So this was like a controversy, and like a lot of controversies in science, it kind of got swept aside as light is weird. Light kind of acts like a particle and a wave. What are you going to do? So this guy came along, genius, smart guy, and he figured out how to force light to be emitted one particle at a time, like a paintball. Just imagine shooting one paintball at that double slit every 10 seconds. You're almost forcing the outcome of the experiment. You're forcing light to behave like a particle, so you're expecting to see two vertical bars on that photoreactive film. How could you not, right? But the surprise is you still see an interference pattern. And so somehow that photon, which is the smallest divisible particle of light possible, is dividing in two and going through both slits at once and interacting with itself. Or it's going through one and time travel. I mean, no one knew how to interpret this.
Yeah.
It didn't make any sense, really. And so they repeat the experiment with electrons. Electrons have mass, they're matter. They should behave like little bullets flying through the air. Again, you see an interference pattern. It's behaving like a wave. The scientific community was really like uncertain about this, and there's a lot of theories that maybe it's experimental error, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. So they come up with an idea to put a sensor behind the slits. And so I think initially they even did them in front, but then a smart person said, no, let's put them behind so we can make sure the measurement's not interfering with the particle. And so when they try to measure which slit that particle moves through, because the appearance on the film is suggesting it goes through both, right? Which is impossible. So let's try to confirm that it really is going through both. That's why they added the sensors. As soon as they do that, they get a different pattern on the screen. They get two vertical bars. And so if you're following along, thinking about this, it's probably a little confusing, as it should be, because what it suggests is that light and even matter, electrons, behaves like a wave when you don't know where the particle is, when you're not looking at it, when you're not measuring it. As soon as you attempt to find where it is in space, it collapses into real physical matter or particles. And so they've done this experiment with bigger and bigger molecules. They've scaled up from electrons, which are unfathomably small, to large, they're called buckyballs, or like these carbon nanotube molecules that are quite large. They've done it with amino acids consistently over and over. When you're not trying to figure out where that molecule is, it acts like energy. It acts like a wave. When you try to locate it in space and time, it acts like a particle. Here is one interpretation of that. I think the correct interpretation. People argue about this. Listen, I didn't have a dog in this fight when I first read it. Maybe we don't completely understand it, but people get emotional when we start talking about the interpretation of this experiment. And so I would say the more mainstream interpretation is the Copenhagen interpretation, or some version of the Copenhagen interpretation, which says that matter is not real. It doesn't exist in a definite location and a definite time until we look at it. And I don't just mean visualize it. I mean, until we become consciously aware of it.
Until consciousness bears its sight on it, so to speak.
Yes, exactly.
Which proves consciousness too. I mean, it's like, even though it's a circular type reasoning, but still, I mean, yeah.
Well, there is something circular going on. I mean, this phenomenon now is being described as co-creation. I got to slow down a little bit because there's a certain sequence that you need to hear this information for it to make any sense. So let me just say first, let me use the video game analogy because I think this kind of ties it together a little bit. Analogies help people understand, even if they're not perfect. The video game analogy actually is really good here. And that's what's led many people to sort of come up with the simulation hypothesis. I don't think that's right. That's not where I'm going with this. So just to preempt people from not liking this idea, I go a different direction. But still, if you're a video game character and it's like an open world, immersive video game, and you're looking at something, in the book I use the example of like a castle on the horizon. If you're looking at that castle is real to your character, right? If he turns around and looks at the forest behind him, you, not living in his simulation, living outside of space and time from his perspective, right? Where is the castle? And you, as an individual living outside of that video game, know that the castle is gone. It is stored on a hard drive in a state of zeros and ones as code. It's pure information. That castle is just information. But to your video game character, he can just turn around and it's right there. Right. So his version of consciousness, right? His perceptual sphere renders information into his reality. It brings it from information to physical reality that he can touch and see.
That word render. That's an important word.
It's what the double slit experiment what it suggests is that our reality works kind of the same way. That somewhere in the universe there things are real. There is information somewhere that describes our reality. That's why you can blindfold yourself, walk across a room, and if I put a box in front of you, you trip. Even though you don't believe that there's a box in front of you. So belief is kind of a double-edged sword because we all have beliefs. And I think all of our beliefs interact. And so maybe a better analogy is like a massively multiplayer online game. We all share a server, call it the universe, but we're rendering information from some information state that we don't understand into our physical reality. And that has led the scientific community to come up with the simulation hypothesis. But what is a simulated world? Well, it's a created world, and created worlds have creators. And so they won't go there, but it's an obvious flaw in the theory. It's the simulation hypothesis is a religious theory.
Definitely.
They're just not using religious vocabulary. Anyway, so I'll stop there because I'll just keep rambling. But so that's like a big principle of the book, and that is really the main interpretation of the double slit experiment. Although people, physicists working in labs in the double slit experiment probably won't describe their work that way, but for the most part, I mean, we've given out Nobel Prizes for that interpretation. This idea that matter is not locally real until it's observed.
Yeah, I mean the double slit proved that, and I also like that. There's another experiment that you talked about in the book, but it was also provable.
Was it about entanglement?
Yes, let's yeah. That's where I want to go. We can probably wrap up there, but let's talk about quantum entanglement and what that means, and then I know you're having to speculate, but what is science if we're not?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So let's talk about quantum entanglement and perhaps its place in the philosophical or spiritual or religious avenue.
Yeah.
What is
So
it first? Yeah.
yeah. Well, so just to wrap up the double slit experiment, I think it shows that belief matters
Yes.
and affects your world, not in like a secret manifestation way,
Right.
but in the
Right.
way Jesus describes. You know
Yes.
that
Totally
that
different. Yeah.
yes, and so I think that's step one. That it also kind of proves like I think people get so hung up on the reality of our existence, and I would just encourage them to study the science and learn that reality maybe is not as real as we think. And so that
Yes.
sort of opens the door in your mind to
Oh
start
yeah. It is in me.
contemplating supernatural phenomena, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so that brings us to entanglement. So Einstein's like major contribution was the theory of special relativity. And it was just this idea that space and time are relative, right? If you're in the International Space Station and you're on a spacewalk, you're moving at like 0 miles an hour relative to the space station that you're holding on to, but you're moving 20,000 miles an hour relative to someone standing on the ground. And if you throw a wrench out from you, you're moving 10 miles an hour away from that wrench. So speed is relative, and it has to do with how fast you're going relative to other physical objects. And so he put forward this idea that no object, no matter, nothing could travel faster than the speed of light. And he came up with the equations to prove it. And so that's a constant that we know the value of. We know the speed of light. And so then this entanglement idea comes along, and it's provable and it's demonstratable. It's this idea that two particles or even pieces of energy like photons created together can be created in such a way that they're entangled with one another. What that means is that they're almost mirror images of each other. And so if we're talking about a photon, think of a photon like a ball. It has a lot of different properties: speed, spin, location, momentum. And so a lot of these properties exist in binary systems. So spin, for example, it can be spinning clockwise or counterclockwise. Makes sense. And so we can take these particles and separate them by a foot, a mile, 1,000 miles, a million light years. they will still be mirror images of one another. If one is spinning clockwise, the other one is spinning counterclockwise. Now, what's important is that we can manipulate one of that pair. We can take the one that's spinning, in other words, upspin or downspin, clockwise, counterclockwise, same thing. We could take the one that's spinning clockwise and turn it so it's spinning counterclockwise. We can use energy to do that. The other one will immediately flip. And so this presents a problem for special relativity because it suggests that some type of information transfer is occurring between those two particles faster than the speed of light.
Yep.
Because it's instantaneous.
Yeah.
And so the reason why this is important to consciousness is that the first theories of consciousness, and this is where it gets really weird. This is what gets me in trouble. But the first theories of consciousness were this idea of transmission theory. And this was the most metaphysical Nikola Tesla ever got because he was a believer in transmission theory. And he has that famous quote, but it's basically, my brain is just a receiver for a force that exists somewhere in the universe.
Yeah.
I haven't penetrated its core, but I know that it's the case. And so the first psychologists believed that our conscious experience is not generated by the brain. Our brain is like an antenna for consciousness. And then they quickly got beat up and kicked out by the production theory folks, which is that every aspect of human experience is created by your brain like a computer, like a machine. The best argument they had was that if our brain's an antenna, if our brain's a receiver, where's the signal? So by this time, we could detect radio waves, we could detect cosmic rays, we could detect electricity, magnetism, and there is no signal being beamed in and out of our brain, right? And so clearly transmission theory is incorrect. Well, entanglement provides that signal. So if I'm experiencing something, it's possible for that information to be transmitted somewhere and vice versa. Okay. And so there's a lot of exciting new theories of consciousness that sort of suggests there are structures in our brain that sort of act, for lack of a better word, like antenna. And man, how would you describe that 4,000 years ago, right? 2,000 years ago? You would say that the flesh is animated by the spirit. And that's exactly what it says. That's exactly what the Bible says.
Yep. Well, I had an experiment on here where I was a guest on another podcast, and the other guest was on there, and so I just had my screen off, and I had my mute on, and I was sitting here humming. I was within 3 seconds, he starts humming too. I mean, I know that sounds really woo-woo, but that's an example of quantum. We're like on the same frequency, sort of.
Yeah. And I think that's even the right word to use. This is where it gets really interesting. But yeah, I mean, if we're tapped into something like some other plane, right?
Right.
Call it whatever you want to call it.
Right.
It would make sense that, our minds are able to dial into like a specific frequency. And this is something that you mentioned you were listening to that other interview I did on Snake Bros.
Yeah.
This is something that one of the hosts mentioned to me about how radio receivers work. And so I didn't know this, but basically you have like a copper wire and you change the length of that wire by turning the knob, the radio knob. And so if that wire is 4 inches, you're going to catch frequencies that have 4-inch wavelengths.
Wow.
And what's so interesting about that is you change the length of that copper wire just a millimeter and you get a completely different station. It's like as if all the other stations don't even exist, right? And it's like, okay, that's cool. Well, when we look in the cortical neurons of our brain, we have a system just like that.
Dendrites, right?
Even crazier than that. So there are these, I mean, I think you could probably make that argument, but actually like way better.
Okay.
So there's this guy, Stuart Hameroff, which is unbelievable to me that he's an atheist because he put this theory forward. But there are these structures in all of our neurons, in all cells on Earth, actually, plants, animals, mushrooms. They're called microtubules. And we just kind of assumed they were like the skeleton for cells because they seem to be structural and proteins walk on them. It's like a road to get around. But we actually know now that they resonate. They vibrate.
Oh, wow.
And the length of the resonant region can be changed. Like strings on a guitar. You can, if you press your finger down on a guitar string, it changes the frequency. of the resonance. We have structures like that in our brain. And so there's this whole area of work on this theory. It's called orchestrated objective reduction, that there's actually quantum, that these tubulin molecules in your microtubules are quantum in nature. Maybe they're entangled. So what that means is we have essentially what you could only be described as an antenna in our cortical neurons in our brain that can change its frequency. So this is interesting because, okay, does prayer change that frequency that you're tapped into? Does sleep? You know, one of the most amazing pieces of research that's come out about microtubules is that they're the site of action for general anesthesia. So a drug that makes you go unconscious binds to the microtubules. So that's incredible evidence that they're related to consciousness, right?
Fascinating.
And so it could be that these microtubules are kind of receivers for what I think you could only, I mean, unless you just hate religion and belief, and can only just be described as a spirit or soul.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I remember that in the book now. Yeah, that was that blew me away. Um, let's talk about frequency because I mean, this you can't talk about what we've talked about and not talk about frequency and how important it is. So, so you have differing camps about frequency. I mean, some people think it's the answer to everything, and then some people think that it's hokey, it's new age, it's whatever. And I don't think I think both are wrong. But I tend to err more on the side of frequency because I've seen it work in my life, and I see it. I see it work in science and like normal what I call mainstream science. They take sonic frequencies and what they blow up kidney stones and to get them to resonate with the same frequency, and I don't see how people can see that. And I guess my problem is where does science stop and then woo woo new age supernatural start? Because there's such a huge overlap, if there even is an overlap. I think it
Yeah.
was it Robert Heinlein? It was one of these sci-fi guys that said, technology. Yeah, if you took some of our technology 1,000 years ago, it'd be called magic. And I don't remember which sci-fi writer it was. It might have been Isaac Asimov, but it just blows me away though that we're learning all this kind of stuff, but it doesn't take away from our belief in God. It just shows me how incredibly wow.
Well, I mean, that's how all the fathers of science felt. Well, I mean, that thing, what you just said. I mean, the quote from Werner Heisenberg is, "The first gulp from the glass of the natural sciences makes you an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting." Because the more
That's a
you learn
great
about
quote.
it's the best. Louis Pasteur has a very similar quote. But basically, yeah, I mean, the more you learn about this stuff, it becomes more for some people. There's just different kinds
Yeah,
of minds out there. But
yeah,
for me, at least, the more I learn about this stuff, the more I'm like, oh yeah, I mean, we don't know anything. Of
yeah.
course, God
I
exists.
mean, some people think we're trying to explain away God, but I'm not. I'm actually
No,
shoring up God. What
yeah.
I'm saying, I'm showing his brilliance and his vastness.
I think that's a totally reasonable perspective. It's my perspective. But you asked about,
It's a worshipful perspective. How can you not worship a being like that? Anyway,
yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, it's just like we're all. I just feel like so many of us like miss the point of this stuff. I mean, on both sides. I tend to be more critical of the scientific perspective because it's the perspective I know.
yeah,
And I've kind of been criticized for that. And the analogy I like to use is like, if your kid gets in trouble for not sharing, are you going to be harder on your kid? Or if you see another kid not sharing, are you going to be harder on a stranger's kid? Well, you're going to kind of be harder on your kid because it's your kid. Like, you want the best for your kid. You want your kid to act better, right? That other kid, that's somebody else's problem. You don't really care, right?
yeah, yeah,
Um, and so you take your kid aside and you tell them, like, no, you need to act better, and this is why, because you want them to grow up and be a successful member of society, right? That's how I feel about science. Like, science is my field. So my criticism of science is like this wanting it to be better because I see a role for it, because I think if you approach it correctly, it makes you believe in God more.
absolutely.
And that's what you were just saying, and I think that's a good thing. But you mentioned frequency. Actually, you made a comment like new age versus science. So this will upset all New Age people, but there are a lot of similarities because there are attempts to sort of explain the world without God, you could argue, right?
Yeah.
But I think New Age, you don't have to convince anybody of your position. You can just say whatever you want, your
Yeah.
crazy ideas you have. Whereas science, you got to convince your peers that you're correct, right? I would say that's the fundamental difference between those two because they're both kind of trying to explore and figure things out. But one is like you can just believe whatever you want. One, you got
Yeah.
to.
One's more anecdotal and the other one's more peer reviewed. And you have to, I think peer reviewed, and that even happens when you deal with in my avenue with the biblical text and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you can't just write speculative stuff like there's somebody out there that says that Esau in the Bible was a Bigfoot
Yeah,
or
yeah,
what. I mean,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I mean, let me just write that out, and yeah. Anyway, so
Yeah, I think there's pros and cons to both things. Like I think both things can exist. That's fine. You need people coming up with crazy ideas. I think that has a role to play in society, but you also need like some structure and stuff. And both can be wrong. I mean,
yeah,
just because something's peer reviewed doesn't mean it's right. It just means they convinced, a few other people.
I want to bring this up before we get into frequency. The sheer number of scientists that have, I think it was Edison that taught this. They sit down, they take a nap, they go into a form of subconsciousness or an altered state of consciousness, and they get all their best ideas, and they come out. Where does that come from?
Man, I think the microtubule stuff fits right into that. It's
Yep,
like
exactly.
I mean, prayer, meditation, and this is not to say like all these things are equally good. I'm
Right,
just saying
right.
that you're doing something to your brain to sort of tap in to some other, I hate to use the word, but some other frequency. And
Or I mean, some people use dimension, but I mean, a dimension can just be an
I don't think
alternate
that's right.
frequency. You don't think
Yeah, I
that's
don't think
right?
that's right. No, I think well, I mean, it depends what you mean by the word. Like
Yeah, yeah,
the problem is all these words have taken on like pop culture meanings and
yeah,
then they also have real scientific meanings. So
yeah.
I I think the real scientific meaning of frequency is valuable. Frequency, it's a measure. It's like saying speed. It is the speed of something important. Well, depends what you mean. Like, is frequency important? Well, it depends what you mean. So, frequency is a metric, and so a particular pitch of sound. If I were to able to place a little dot in space, I could count how many peaks of that wave, of that sine wave, that compression wave, move by that point every second, and I can record that in hertz. And so it means something. And so sound has frequency. Sound's interesting because it's physical. It's a physical wave that actually can move physical matter around when it hit. You can vibrate your chest. But light also has frequency, and that's not physical. It's energetic. And special cells in your eyes can interpret the wavelength of those waves, and you interpret them as red versus blue versus purple. So frequency is obviously really important. I mean, you can turn visible light into an X-ray just by changing the frequency of the wave. It's the same thing. It's just light. It's just a different frequency.
But this just hit me. You dive into the whole realm of let's. I mean, I'm not going to go here, obviously, but the whole realm of psychedelics and those microtubules and how they affect your perception reality of those of those. Like you use the example that an apple's not really red. It absorbs every other frequency except for red, and that's why we see it as red. And so it's almost like those psychedelics or alternate drug type things can affect the frequencies in our brain and make us
Yeah.
see an alternate reality. And I
Well,
don't know.
since you went there, I'll go there because
Okay.
this is the type of research I do. It's biomedical, so I don't really have a way to do these type of studies that I would like to do in this area, right? Because there needs to be a medical rationale. But their DMT looks a lot structurally. It looks a lot like tryptophan, and there are tryptophan residues on microtubules.
Mm,
You can make an argument that general anesthesia turns consciousness down. It's possible that certain psychedelics turn consciousness up. It increases the bandwidth of reality that you're able to take into your
that
mind,
makes
right?
sense.
And so maybe you're tapping into
Turkey after
frequencies.
Thanksgiving, right? Tryptophan, and it turns
Yeah.
it down, right? I mean, yeah, that makes sense. Yep.
And so, oh, that's funny. And so there's there's been a few really interesting studies. So I mentioned the study on Well, actually, I don't think I did. So this guy, I think his name was Mike Weist. He's on Case. He works at Case Western, I want to say. He's at a research institution, and he had two groups of mice, and so he gave one of those groups this drug called epithelone B, I think, which binds to microtubules. And so if anesthetics bind to microtubules, but you've already given them epithelone B, the hypothesis is anesthetics wouldn't work as good, right? Because you've already bound something to the site of action. And that's exactly what he saw. The mice that got general anesthesia without epithelone B went straight to sleep. The mice that had epithelone B administered first, the anesthesia didn't work. And so right there, we're like, okay, people are always surprised to hear we don't know how general anesthesia works. Well, we don't. And so this was the first study to really show like microtubules are the site of action, which kind of suggests that microtubules are related to consciousness. Well, DMT, if we could prove, or psychedelics, if we could prove they bind to microtubules, then that theory I just laid out would sort of be proven. And so I hope someone out there will do that study where they give mice epithelone B and DMT. And if the DMT doesn't work, which is you need to come up with a protocol to measure if the DMT works in mice, but
Yeah, that's tough.
which exists, funny enough.
Really interesting.
Yeah. There's all these tests you can do to measure like the level of anxiety in a mouse, and so anyway, but there's another study which I think is really cool that shows that the brain waves of mice on DMT look identical to the brain waves of mice that are asleep. And so the theory is like all of these different modulations of consciousness we have, sleep, psychedelics, prayer, caffeine, all these things
Yeah,
are just changing that band of frequency that we're tapped into.
yeah,
And so it could be that psychedelics is you're going to that same place that you go to when you dream. You're just awake.
yeah,
Kind of a cool idea.
yeah. Well, and their antenna. It gets back to what you said about microtubules
Yeah.
being the antennas of consciousness. I mean,
You're just
that's.
turning that radio dial a little bit to the right or the
But
left.
it's just really funny because I'm trying to get into ham radio because it just interests me, and I just bought me a shortwave radio because I hadn't got my
Nice.
license yet. Yep, and just the whole aspect of that whole frequency stuff, and we're surrounded by it, and I've used it in numerous sermons about the unseen and the spiritual around us. It's not real. We just don't see it, and
Exactly.
things are on
Yep.
different spectrums and stuff like that. Anyway, so
Imagine if we could see X-rays with their eyes.
wow.
Listen, it's just so if people just Google like the electromagnetic spectrum, they can see that there's just this really tiny frequency range that our eyes can see. And X-rays, cosmic rays, infrared, they're all outside of that visual region that our
Yeah.
eyes function at. If we could see X-rays, you could imagine me and someone else arguing about whether or not those X-rays are really there. Like we just assume that our reality is like this, but it's not. This is just the frequency of sensory experience that our bodies are tuned into. And if it's like if the tree fell in the forest, does anyone
Yeah.
around, with anyone around to hear it, did it make a noise? And the answer is obviously no. And I know that bothers people, but the experience of sound only happens when you mix a compression wave with a cochlea, the organ in your ear that allows you to hear sound, and a brain. And so without any one of those ingredients, you don't experience sound. Experience only occurs in the minds of conscious agents.
Is that why no one can hear you scream in space?
No compression wave. No compression wave. Yep. That is why you need sound needs a medium to travel. So there you go.
For you young folks out there, that was the I went to see Star Wars when I was a kid, and that commercial frightened me more than anything. The alien, it says, "No one in space, no one can hear you scream."
That is kind of frightening. Oh man. Well, hopefully some of this stuff I'm saying makes sense. I think
Oh
I did
yeah,
a better job laying it out. That's the beauty of writing is you could write something, you could scratch it out, you can change it.
yeah.
But man,
What about frequency with health and bio? You're in the bio field, so do you think there's a future for a lot of more frequency medicine, so to
yeah,
speak?
I think so. Again, it comes down to what you mean exactly. So
Yeah, yeah,
so there are frequency is like an infinite spectrum. you could have one oscillation per billion years or a billion oscillations per nanosecond. So it's just this infinite spectrum of vibration or oscillation switching back and forth. And also you can have different types of energy or different types of waves at different frequencies. So here's one thing we know for sure. This is kind of like a revolution in Alzheimer's research, is that in a lot of different neurodegenerative diseases, is that your brain, the electrical oscillations in your neurons will entrain, like sync with the stimuli of your environment. And so there are different ways to change like the overall electrical oscillations of your brain. And so one thing they found is that high frequency stimuli, like 40 hertz and above, whether that's visual, just like a flickering screen, but like white, black, 40 times a second or higher, or a 40 hertz or higher sound, just on, off, on, off, on, off, will cause your brain to basically suck the amyloid, which is a pathological protein in Alzheimer's disease, out of your brain. And so listen, it's not curative necessarily, but the point is just that
Treatable. I mean,
frequency
yeah.
frequency has a physical effect on the brain.
Wow.
And Hammeroff, the guy I mentioned earlier, he's doing an interesting study with ultrasound, which is a much higher frequency of sound than something you could actually hear. But he's doing a study with ultrasound, possibly causing microtubules to reassemble. And so people who don't know, I mean, that's the main pathology in advanced Alzheimer's disease, is your microtubules fall
You lose
apart.
your antennas. Yeah. I mean, in wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's not, again, because the new age side of things has sort of hijacked the word frequency,
Yeah.
there is kind of like a stigma associated with this kind of research.
Yeah.
But because of the studies that are coming out in mice and now even humans with sound and light and things, that stigma, I would say, is fading slowly. But it's also not, the profit incentive is not as great as a drug, a flickering light that you install. Like if you replace all your light bulbs in your house with the flicker, that's not as exciting as like buying a drug once a week for the rest of your life, from a profit perspective.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that hinders it as well,
Well,
but
that's why
it's happening.
alternative medicine is in a lot of ways is crushed in the United States. It's just money. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
yeah.
people attribute like a lot of malice to that. I tend not. Listen, I
Mm-hmm.
at the highest levels, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I attribute a lot of malice to like the
Mm-hmm.
executives and the board members of these companies, but for the most part, I think everybody's just trying to get along and get by and make money. And
Yeah.
if there's a profit incentive to develop a drug, as a scientist just trying to make a little, I mean, I think people have a weird perspective of the typical scientist. Like the typical scientist is not making much money. And so if there's more money available to fund research, if you go into the drug side of things, you just tend to. And I don't necessarily blame like the average guy just trying to keep his job.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know how we change that. That's a cultural thing that I don't know if we can change. It might just be up to kind of brave rogue people to sort of self-fund research or try to get grants to do some of this stuff. And that is sort of happening. It's just slow because we
Yeah.
don't have billion-dollar budgets.
And Elon, like him or hate him, I mean that's one of the good things about him is he is into funding fringy or outlier type research, which is good. I mean that's a good trait. So,
Yeah, I think so.
and there's other billionaires out there too that do the same, pushing it and have the funds to be able to do that without grants with a lot of red tape.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, but listen, at the end of the day, and this is kind of a theme in the Bible too, like, I don't know, like we just can't cling desperately to this life, right? I mean, we're all terminal, as much as I hate to say it.
yeah,
And, we should also probably be putting as much energy into our spiritual health as our physical health, something like that.
well, yeah, a group that came out of my tradition, the Church of England, the Puritans, they get a bad rap, like I guess a lot of scientists do, but not all of them were puritanical. But Um, I have several of their prayer books, and I love their prayer books, them and the old Celt Irish church, and because they saw death as part of life, and I think we need to get back to that too. And I mean, there's a prayer that I used to pray every day. I want to have a good death. I want to die well. I mean, that's so foreign to our culture nowadays,
Yes.
everywhere in the world.
I read this quote and I wish I knew who said it, but it was like everything about our society, everything is designed to distract us from the fact that we're going to die. All the busy little things we busy ourselves with and all the little it's like all of culture and all of society is designed to just make you forget about this.
Yeah,
Yeah. On one hand, that's not you don't want to be like obviously you don't want to be obsessed about the terminal nature of existence, right? But on
yeah,
the other hand, you don't really have a choice. To what you're saying, like maybe people don't want to think about it, but no one's beat it yet. Well, one guy has
yeah.
beat it. But
Well, and two, the other thing is and as I've gotten older, I'm 50. As I've gotten older, I've began to see that it's relationships, and it goes back to you said something in your book that reminded me of how I think even science is very communal. It's like you were talking about the different forms of reality, how we have a multiplayer game,
yeah,
just the community that we have, and
yes,
that's what we're going to carry with us.
yeah,
Those
I think so.
relationships and yeah, yeah.
I think
Because
so. I mean, that's kind of like I guess cliche, but I think it really just
no,
the only thing that matters is other people. You know.
exactly, and 'cause other conscious, other people. Yep. So, well, look, bro, man, this was exciting, Trevor. I think this is so. Put out another book, man. I want to have you back on my show.
I'm halfway done with one, but it's very different.
Oh, can you give me a hint, or is it under
Well,
the
I
wraps?
don't know what people think about this because again, like I haven't been religious, so I wasn't even aware of this until later in life. But I think it might be associated with Catholicism. So I don't know if people will have a mixed reaction. I know everyone has their different
Yeah, yeah,
doctrinal beliefs and stuff.
yeah.
Um, I became aware about 4 years ago of the Shroud of Turin
Mm,
for the second time in my life because I
mm,
mean I had always heard it was fake, right? But I became aware of some new evidence, and I started kind of like an email communication over the past year with some of the main researchers into the shroud's authenticity, both pro and con.
yeah,
Trying to talk to both
yeah.
sides. I am as convinced as a scientist could be responsibly convinced that it is an
Real.
authentic
Yeah, that's where I've come
piece of.
over the I haven't done obviously near about the research that you do, but hey, when you write that book, I want you back on my show because I mean, there's a lot of naysayers out there, and I'm not saying when I say naysayers, I don't mean that pejoratively, but there's a guy that a buddy of mine had on his podcast. He called it the fraud of Turin, but I don't think it was as much that it was a fraud as just the things that are surrounded with the Shroud of Turin. A lot of the
People have really
myths and
emotional
stuff.
reactions to it.
Yes, and I'm not even Catholic, and I believe it's real.
Well, it's not a Catholic. I mean,
No, no,
they have it, they
yeah,
possess it, but it's
yeah.
not a
It's not.
Catholic.
Ultimately, it's not. It's a church thing. It belongs to the church, not one brand of it. But yeah, I can't wait. So yeah. So how close are you to putting it out?
Maybe a few more months. The more public, like, conversations I have with people who disagree with me, the more I've identified this, phenomenon in, like, debates and stuff, where not that I have a lot of debates, but it's just something I've seen, is that if you're, like, listing all the evidence for something, right? And you're trying to add more and more evidence and you're like waiting for the person to respond, so you keep adding more things. The quality of your evidence gets lower and lower towards the end of your list, right? You start
Oh
off
yeah,
with your best arguments and
yeah,
then you
yep,
get to the very end. And I notice what the shroud naysayers do is they'll like attack one of the weakest arguments and they'll say, see, you know they'll attack your weakest argument and somehow they'll try to apply that discreditation to all of the arguments, right? And so there's like a core group of like four or five arguments that just cannot be explained. Some type of miracle took place. Now, I know people who believe the shroud is real and don't believe that Jesus is the incarnation of God. I don't know how you get to that place. That's like a really strange place. But most people who really investigate this, I think, are convinced. If you can investigate it with an open mind, it is
That's
an
the key.
image.
That's the
It's an
key.
image burnt into cloth with light that encodes three-dimensional data. It's like an X-ray in that sense, and it's a photo negative. It's a photo negative burnt into a cloth. It's not paint,
Yeah,
and so
I saw an AI
he
the other day where they reversed negative. It was really cool because he turned and he smiled. I was like, man, it was like, wow, see Jesus smile. It's so cool.
that's I forget the software they use. That's like a hot topic
Did you
that a
see
lot
that?
of
Have you
yeah,
seen that?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. A lot of the naysayers actually use that as like anyway, but I won't go there yet. But if you just it is a photo negative and people don't understand how insane that is because you would have to believe that someone in the 14th century could burn a photo negative image with like rich forensic medical data encoded into it into linen. And that's insane. So you have to believe in a miracle. You have to believe that there is some sort of supernatural technology in the 13th century, which is a popular new age idea. Don't get me wrong, the
No, yeah,
Templars,
yeah,
blah blah
yeah,
blah.
yeah.
Or you have to believe it captures the moment of the resurrection. And given what we know about the role of light in consciousness, it is kind of interesting to think about the moment of resurrection causing this intense bright light because we know that happens at conception. We know that literal photons extinguish at death. And so the idea that the incarnation of a spirit into a body would emit this bright light, man, I think it's compelling. So yeah,
Well,
I'll be back in a few months.
yeah, yeah, and that and the transfiguration, but in the text there, I mean, it's the same principle. It's a bright light and almost like an unveiling is what I like to call of it. And anyway, yeah. So, but yeah, when that, please connect back with me when I'm gonna keep track of it. I really want to have you back on the show about that. And and I was gonna ask you too. Do you have any? Have you done any deep dives into AI and what you think's going on there and stuff?
Yeah,
So
I
maybe I can
have.
have you back sooner than that before we can talk about that. I would love to have you
Absolutely.
back on the show. So,
I'd love
well,
to.
thank you. Now, look, details. Where can people reach you? Where can they? They can obviously read your book. I'm gonna promote it on the show notes. Is there you have a Facebook, IG, anything?
I'm terrible with social media. This is what I've been telling people. If you want to talk to me about the book, I would love that. I'm very curious to get feedback. godseyeviewbook at gmail.com. Folks can
Okay.
email me.
Okay.
I also my publisher has a Substack, hemisphericpress.substack.com. I post audio episodes and writings up there. Check it out.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Trevor. I appreciate your time and everything you've done today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening and supporting us. And remember, stay naturally supernatural.